He didn't want trouble, just a look at an old rifle he used to carry long before most of them were even born. But the clerk laughed at his questions, mocked his limp, called him grandpa, and told him to leave. The old man didn't argue. He left quietly like he always had, one step at a time. What the clerk didn't know was that the name on that man's dog tag still meant something. And exactly 1 hour later, an entire Navy SEAL team pulled into the parking lot. No sirens, no warnings, just a dozen men walking in formation, dead silent, and asking one question: where is he? Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of disrespect, loyalty, and redemption, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe real warriors never forget their own, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The gun shop sat on the edge of town, nestled between a bait store and a hardware warehouse. Its windows tinted just enough to give the illusion of authority. Inside, racks of rifles lined the walls like trophies, and glass counters displayed handguns too polished to look real. Behind the register, two young clerks leaned over their phones, half paying attention to the soft hum of country music playing from the ceiling speaker. The place wasn't busy, but it never needed to be. This was the kind of store that made its money on image. At exactly 10:43 a.m., the front door chimed. The man who entered didn't command attention. He simply existed in a way that made everything a little quieter. Worn boots, jeans that had been patched at the knee, a brown leather jacket older than half, the staff. His face was weathered but calm, eyes sharp under the brim of a faded Navy SEAL cap. He moved slowly but with purpose, his limp noticeable, but never pitiful. He didn't glance around. He walked straight to the counter, rested his hand gently on the glass, and waited. One of the clerks looked up, gave a forced smile. Need something, see? The old man nodded once. Yeah, wondering if you still carry the M1 Grand replica from the back wall. The real stock model. The kid blinked. That's a collector's piece, not something you'd want to fire. I didn't ask to fire it. The man said, voice even. Just wanted to hold it for a moment. Haven't touched one in decades. The second clerk, a little older, stepped in with a chuckle. That rifle's heavier than it looks, Pops. Might be a bit much for your back. The old man didn't smile. He just said, I used to carry one across jungles. I can manage it across a showroom. That was when the tone changed. The first kid laughed too loud. Okay, Rambo, unless you're buying, you're just taking up space. Let the real customers in. The second added, yeah, we're not a museum. The old man paused. For a second, it looked like he was going to say something, maybe correct them, maybe remind them who he was. But instead, he looked down at the counter, nodded to himself, and simply said, understood. Then he turned around, walked to the door, and left. No protest, no anger, no demand to speak to the owner. Just one man alone again, walking slowly back toward the edge of a country that had forgotten what some men gave for it. Inside, the clerks went back to scrolling their phones. Neither of them noticed the woman by the ammo rack. Mid-one 1930s gym shirt ball cap pulled low, watching the scene in silence. Nor did they notice her step outside 2 minutes later, pull a phone from her pocket, and make one single call. She said 3 words. He was there. At 11:43 a.m., the parking lot in front of the gun shop began to fill, but not with customers. A matte black SUV pulled in and parked close to the entrance. The engine stayed on a minute later, another parked beside it. Then a third. No music, no movement, just quiet humming machines with dark glass and tinted intentions. Inside the store, the clerks were still joking, still scrolling through their phones, still unaware that the atmosphere outside was shifting. Then the doors opened 3 at once, and 12 men stepped out. Their movements were deliberate, unhurried, but carried a weight that made people stop mid-step. They weren't loud. They didn't shout, but something about their presence made the air feel heavier. Some wore civilian clothes, some dress, uniforms. Most didn't need either. The way they walked told you who they were. It was in their shoulders, in their eyes, in the way they scanned the street out of habit, not nerves. They crossed the sidewalk in silence and stepped through the front door one by one. The chime rang softly as they entered, and even that sound felt different. Not a single word was spoken. They simply spread out in a calm, semicircular formation facing the counter. The youngest clerk, seated on a stool behind the register, barely looked up from his phone. "Welcome in, gents." "Looking for anything specific today," he said without much interest. Then he glanced up and froze. 12 men's still quiet eyes locked on him. The oldest of them, graying hair, square jaw, chest-bearing, rows of ribbons, and the unmistakable sealed trident, stepped forward. "An hour ago," he said evenly, "one of us walked through this door." His voice wasn't loud, but it hit with force. The second clerk, who had made the joke earlier, cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Sir, I think there's a misunderstanding." The man cut him off with nothing but a look. "He didn't come here to be honored," the SEAL continued. "Didn't ask to be recognized. He just wanted to see a rifle he hadn't touched since Vietnam." Your staff laughed, called him Grandpa, told him to leave. You didn't ask who he was, you didn't care. He placed something on the counter, a scorched flag patch folded and worn. "He pulled this off my uniform when I was bleeding out in Helmand. Carried me out on foot 22 hours with no radio, no backup, and a hole in his side. The size of a fist. He never told anyone about it. Ever asked for thanks, but when he walked in here today, you treated him like a problem." The younger clerk swallowed hard, shifting in place, eyes flicking toward the door, as if hoping to escape. The SEAL didn't move. "We're not here for revenge. We don't need an apology, but he won't speak for himself, so we're speaking for him." Another SEAL stepped forward and placed a photo on the glass. 8 men arms slung over shoulders, dust-caked and sunburned, but smiling. The man in the center, younger than unmistakable now, was the same one they had mocked an hour ago. The clerk's mouth opened slightly. "I didn't know." The lead SEAL nodded slowly. "Exactly. You didn't ask. No threats, no demands, just truth." Then the first man turned, the others followed. 12 of them walking out the same way they came in, without fanfare, without sound, just leaving behind a silence no bullet could replicate. Outside, a small crowd had started to gather, drawn by instinct more than curiosity. Phones came out, not to film, but to record just in case they forgot how it felt to see something like this. The SEALs didn't acknowledge them. They didn't need to. They got back in their vehicles and drove off one after another like nothing had happened. But something had, because inside the shop, the air didn't return to normal. The clerk sat down slowly, staring at the photo still sitting in front of him. For the first time, he realized he hadn't just thrown out an old man. He had dismissed history, and now the entire world was about to learn who they'd really pushed out the door. By 1:45 p.m., and the photo had already gone viral in 3 veteran Facebook groups. It was taken by a customer who had walked in just after the SEALs arrived. 12 men standing in complete silence inside the gun shop, all facing the counter, where 2 clerks stood frozen behind the register. No fists, no shouting, just stillness and a presence too heavy to ignore. The caption simply read, "When you disrespect a SEAL, you get all of them." At first, most people didn't understand the context. The post was shared and reshared, often with nothing but the American flag emoji. Then someone asked who was the old man they were standing for, and that's when everything changed. By 2:12 p.m., a name emerged in the comments. James C. Beckett, a man who had been seen around town for years, but never spoken much. Always polite, always alone, wear the same beat-up SEAL, Team 3 cap every day. No one ever asked what it meant until now. One commenter wrote, "He was my uncle's co in 90. Saved 3 men in Panama, didn't talk about it once after coming home." Another added, "Me, if that's Beckett, we're talking about a real ghost. The kind of guy you only hear about in briefings, never in the news." Someone found a grainy, scanned personnel summary buried in a military archive and uploaded it under the photo. Master Chief Special Warfare Operator James Charles Beckett. SEAL Team 3 joined in 1966, retired in 2004. Bronze Star, Silver Star, Purple Heart, multiple unlisted combinations. Records showing service across Vietnam, Mogadishu, Panama, and Iraq. Over 35 confirmed personnel extractions in hostile zones. No autobiography, no press coverage, no interviews, just decades of silence, decades of doing the job. By 3:00 p.m., the local news station had picked up the story titled Simply Silent Visit. 12 Navy SEALs show up at gun store in support of local veteran. The article gave no sensationalist details, just facts. A man had come in. He'd been asked to leave. An hour later, a team arrived, and suddenly a quiet, overlooked figure had become a symbol of everything people had forgotten to respect. At the shop, the silence hadn't lifted. The clerks hadn't spoken to one. Another in over an hour, the photograph left behind by the SEALs sat on the counter showing 8 men in a black and white group photo in the desert. They were muddy, sunburnt young, but their eyes were hard. Beckett was in the middle, standing with arms crossed in a half smile that said nothing and everything at once. Customers who came and later didn't ask about ammunition or gear. They asked who the man in the photo was. They asked if he was coming back. One older customer, a Marine from Desert Storm, stood at the counter, stared at the photo for a full minute, then saluted it and walked out without saying a word. By 4:00 p.m., a veteran on publication had published a short piece titled, "The Ones Who Stand When You're Gone." It ended with a line that would be quoted thousands of times. Over the following days, James Beckett didn't need to speak. His silence was covered by 12 voices who chose not to raise theirs either. Back inside the store, the manager arrived pale, holding his phone in one hand, trying to process what had just happened. The photo had been sent to him twice already before he even pulled into the lot. The scorched flag patch that had been left on the counter remained untouched. He didn't blame the clerks. He didn't even speak to them. He simply walked to the display. Case took out the M1. Garin, the old man, had asked to see, and placed it on the counter beside the photo. Then he took a sheet of paper, wrote something by hand, and slid it into a clear frame next to the weapon. No fanfare, just a line of text. He carried it once. We'll carry the memory now. Outside the store, someone had placed a single white flower against the door, then a challenge coin, then a folded piece of paper with nothing but the word respect. By nightfall, a small crowd had gathered here. Some came to pay respects. Others just wanted to see the place where something real had happened. There were no protests, no chants, no outrage, only quiet. A kind of reverent hush that said more than 1,000 headlines ever could. As for Beckett, he didn't respond to the coverage, didn't post, didn't grant interviews. He wasn't even aware of the online wave building behind him. He went home the same way he'd arrived, unnoticed. But for the first time in years, when someone passed him on the sidewalk, they didn't glance past him. They looked twice, because now the town knew exactly who they had asked to leave and who had answered in his place. In the days that followed, something shifted in town. Not dramatically, not publicly, but deeply. The gun shop, once just another business with a cash register and a rack of tactical gear, became something else. It wasn't about weapons anymore. It was about memory. People came not to shop, but to reflect. Veterans walked through the door, not with a list, but with stories. Some left patches from their own units beside Beckett's photo. Others asked quietly, "He okay?" No one really knew. The truth was, James Beckett hadn't changed his routine. He still walked 2 miles every morning before the sun got too high. Still stopped at the same corner diner for black coffee and no sugar. Still sat alone at the back booth, the one no one ever asked to share, and he never once mentioned the day he was thrown out or the men who showed up behind him. Not to the waitress, not to the cook, not even to the old Marine who sometimes nodded at him across the room. But people noticed anyway. When a local high school invited veterans to speak in history, Class Beckett didn't reply, but the week after the principal received an envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter describing a rescue up in 1970. No name, no signature, just a map reference and the names of the 6 men saved. It was framed and hung in the school hallway without ceremony. Back at the gun shop, they kept the scorch patch in the display case. The owner, who hadn't been there the day of the incident, had it mounted in glass. Beside it, he added a simple inscription: "For the man we didn't recognize, and the brothers who wouldn't, let us forget." The story made its way across veteran forums, then on to talk radio, then quietly into policy meetings. No one reported on because what happened that day wasn't a protest. It wasn't a fight. It was something rarer. Men standing for one of their own without saying a word. And the message was received. 2 weeks later, the SEAL team returned, but not to the shop. They came to Beckett's diner. They didn't take a table. They didn't make a scene. They just walked in one by one and stood silently by the booth while he sipped his coffee. He looked up, met their eyes, and for a second, no one breathed. Then the youngest among them, the one who hadn't been born when Beckett left the service, spoke. "Sir, if it's all right, we'd like to sit with you." Beckett nodded once. They filled the booth without another, and for the next hour, no one at the diner heard a single thing. But everyone there remembered the silence because it spoke louder than anything else ever could. Some men don't need a title to be respected. They don't ask for credit. They don't raise their voices. They just do what has to be done and then disappear into silence. Chief James Beckett didn't come to prove anything. He wasn't there to be recognized or thanked or told he mattered. He already knew who he was. What mattered was that he didn't come looking for trouble, just for a glimpse of the old rifle he once carried across deserts and jungles, long before most of the men behind the counter had even been born. But instead of respect, he was met with laughter. The younger clerk chuckled at his questions, made a cruel joke about the limp in his right leg, called him Grandpa, and waved him off like a nuisance. The old man didn't protest. He simply nodded, turned around, and walked out. One slow, deliberate step at a time, like he had done 1,000 times before, in places far harsher than this. What the clerk didn't know was this: the name on that old man's dog tag still held weight. And exactly 60 minutes later, a black SUV convoy rolled into the parking lot. No sirens, no warnings, just 12 men stepping out in formation. Silent, precise, focused. Men who had seen war, men who had bled together, men who came with a single question: where is he? Welcome to Human Stories. Before we dive into this emotional tale of disrespect, loyalty, and redemption, tell me, from which city are you watching this video today? And if you believe real warriors never leave their own behind, hit that subscribe button, because stories like this need to be remembered. The gun shop sat at the quiet edge of town, tucked between an aging bait store and a forgotten hardware warehouse. Its windows were tinted just enough to look serious, like it had something to prove. Inside, rows of rifles lined the walls like museum pieces. The glass display cases gleamed with handguns so pristine, they looked more like props than weapons. Behind the register, 2 clerks, barely past 20, slouched over their phones, half listening to the low hum of country music drifting from the overhead speakers. The shop wasn't busy. It didn't need to be. This was a place built on image. A place that sold bravado more than bullets. At 10:43 a.m., the door chimed. The man who stepped inside didn't shout or draw attention. He simply arrived, with the quiet gravity of someone who had once stood between danger and the rest of the world. His boots were worn. His jeans had a patch at the right knee. The brown leather jacket he wore? Older than half the staff combined. His name was Raymond Kane, and before the morning was over, every man in that building would know it. His face was lined with age, sun-worn and silent, but the steel-gray eyes beneath the brim of a faded Navy SEAL cap were anything but tired. They were watchful, steady, the kind of eyes that had once scanned jungle shadows for snipers and desert roads for landmines. His limp was evident, but it never begged for pity. Each step was slow, yes, but deliberate, measured, as if every inch of motion still carried purpose. He didn't look around. He just walked to the counter and rested a calloused hand gently on the glass, his knuckles scarred from a lifetime the clerks behind the counter would never understand. One of them, barely old enough to shave, looked up and offered a half-hearted smirk. "Need something, sir?" The old man nodded once. "Yeah, I was wondering if you still carry that M1 Garand replica, the real stock model." From the back wall, the clerk blinked, surprised. "That one's a collector's piece," he scoffed. "Not exactly something you'd want to shoot." "I didn't ask to fire it," the old man replied, his voice low and even. "Just wanted to hold it. Haven't touched one in decades." The second clerk, a little older, leaned in with a chuckle. "That rifle's heavier than it looks, Pops. Might be a bit much for your back, huh?" The old man didn't smile. He just said, calm and flat, "I carried one through jungles. I think I can manage it across a showroom." That's when the shift happened. The younger clerk let out a too loud laugh, trying to look tough in front of no one. "Okay, Rambo, unless you're buying, you're just taking up space. Let the real customers in." The second clerk added with a sneer, "Yeah, we're not a museum, old-timer." The old man paused. For a moment, it looked like he might correct them, maybe remind them whose name was etched into brass on a memorial in a place they'd never visit. Maybe tell them what it meant to carry a friend's body for miles under gunfire. But he didn't. He looked down at the counter, nodded to himself, and simply said, "Understood." Then he turned and walked out. No raised voice, no demand for respect, no request to see the manager. Just one man, once again, alone with his past, walking slowly back toward the edge of a country that had long forgotten the price some men had paid for its freedom. Inside, the clerks laughed and went back to their phones. They never noticed the woman by the ammo rack. Mid-30s, sleeveless gym shirt, baseball cap pulled low. She had said nothing, watched everything. 2 minutes later, she stepped outside, pulled a phone from her back pocket, and said 3 words. He was there. At 11:43 a.m., the parking lot outside the gun shop began to shift, not with customers, but with presence. A matte black SUV rolled in, parked near the entrance, engine still running. Then a second, then a third. No music, no movement, just quiet engines and darkened windows. Glass like obsidian, intentions unreadable. Inside, the clerks were still scrolling, still joking, still unaware the temperature in the air had changed. Then, 3 doors opened at once and 12 men stepped out. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their movements were steady, composed, but carried that invisible weight, the kind that made strangers pause mid-step and instinctively clear the path. Some wore pressed civilian clothes. Others, dress uniforms. Most wore neither, because their presence spoke louder than medals. It was in the way they scanned the horizon, not nervously but habitually. It was in the shape of their shoulders, in the silence of their stride. They crossed the pavement in sync, and one by one stepped through the shop's front door. The chime above rang softly. Even that sound felt heavier. Inside, they fanned out in a clean, practiced semicircle, all eyes locked on the counter. The younger clerk, still hunched over his phone, barely looked up. "Welcome in, gents," he muttered. "Looking for anything specific?" Then he glanced again and froze. 12 men, still, silent, eyes like carved granite. And from the center of them, one step forward, older than the rest, graying at the temples, square-jawed, rows of ribbons over his chest, and on his collar, clear as day, the seal trident. His voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. "An hour ago," he said, "one of us walked through this door." That was all. The second clerk, suddenly pale, swallowed hard, the words caught in his throat. The smile gone, the smirk erased. For the first time all morning, he understood silence could shout. The younger clerk stammered, "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." But the seal cut him off with nothing more than a look. Not anger, not contempt, just a quiet, devastating finality. "He didn't come here to be honored," the man said calmly. "Didn't ask to be recognized. All he wanted was to see a rifle he hadn't held since Vietnam." He stepped forward and laid something gently on the glass counter. It was a small, scorched patch, an American flag, frayed, faded, and folded. "He pulled this off my uniform when I was bleeding out in Helmand," the SEAL continued. "Carried me out on foot. 22 hours, no radio, no backup. A hole in his side the size of a fist." His voice didn't waver. "He never told anyone, never asked for thanks, never even mentioned it. But when he walked in here today, you laughed. You called him Grandpa. You told him to leave." The clerk swallowed hard, his face pale. He shifted on his feet, glancing toward the exit, as if maybe he could walk away from the weight pressing down on his chest. The SEAL didn't move. "We're not here for revenge. We don't need an apology. He won't speak for himself, so we're speaking for him." Another SEAL stepped forward, silent. He placed a photo on the counter. 8 men, dust-caked, sunburned, and smiling. Their arms slung over each other's shoulders, exhausted but unbroken. In the center, Raymond Kane, years younger, unmistakable now. The same man they had mocked, dismissed, laughed out of the store. The clerk's mouth opened slightly. I didn't know." The lead SEAL nodded once, slowly. "Exactly. You didn't ask." No yelling, no threats, just truth. Then he turned. The others followed. 12 men walking out exactly the way they came in. No fanfare, no sound, just the echo of a moment no bullet could replicate. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by instinct more than curiosity. No one shouted. Phones were raised, not to go viral, but to remember, to bear witness, to make sure they didn't forget what dignity looked like. The SEALs didn't wave, didn't acknowledge the crowd. They didn't need to. They climbed back into their SUVs, one by one, and drove off like nothing had happened. But something had. Because inside the gun shop, the air never quite returned to normal. The clerk, silent now, sat down slowly. He stared at the photo in front of him, stared at the patch, stared at the quiet absence where Raymond Kane had stood. And for the first time in his life, he realized he hadn't just mocked an old man. He had dismissed history. He had turned his back on a living chapter of sacrifice. By 1:45 p.m., the photo was already viral across 3 veterans groups on Facebook, taken by a quiet customer who'd walked in just after the SEALs arrived. 12 men standing in silence. No fists, no shouting, just stillness and a presence too heavy to ignore. The caption read simply, "When you disrespect one SEAL, you get all of them." At first, no one knew what had happened. The post spread fast, accompanied by nothing but the emoji. But then someone asked, who was the old man they were standing for? That's when everything changed. By 2:12 p.m., a name emerged in the comments. James C. Beckett, a man who had lived in that town for years. Quiet, polite, always alone. Wore the same beat-up SEAL Team 3 cap every day. No one had ever asked what it meant. Until now. One commenter wrote, "He was my uncle's CO in 91, saved 3 men in Panama, never spoke about it once after coming home." Another added, "If that's Beckett, you're talking about a ghost." The kind of guy we heard about in briefings, but never in the news. Soon someone unearthed a scanned personnel record from a forgotten archive. The caption under the photo was updated. Master Chief Special Warfare Operator, James Charles Beckett, SEAL Team 3 joined, 1966. Retired, 2004. Bronze Star, Silver Star, Purple Heart, multiple unlisted commendations, combat deployments in Vietnam, Mogadishu, Panama, Iraq. Over 35 confirmed extractions under fire. No autobiography, no press, no interviews. Just decades of silence, decades of doing the show. By 3:00 p.m., the local news quietly published a headline. Silent visit, 12 Navy SEALs walk into gun store in support of local veteran. No sensationalism, no outrage, just facts. A man had walked into a store. He was laughed at, dismissed. An hour later, 12 men showed up, unannounced, unwavering, and suddenly, someone the town had overlooked for years became a symbol of everything it had forgotten to honor. Inside the shop, the air still hadn't moved. The clerks hadn't spoken a word to each other in over an hour. The photo left behind on the counter remained where it was. 8 young men in black and white, dust-streaked, sunburned, but solid. In the middle, Raymond Kane, arms folded, lips pressed into a quiet half-smile that said both "I'm here" and "that's enough." Customers trickled in through the afternoon. None asked about rifles, none browsed for ammunition. They pointed at the photo. Some asked who the man was. Some asked if he was coming back. An older customer, a Desert Storm Marine, stood at the counter, stared at the photo for a full minute, then saluted it and walked out without saying a word. By 4:00 p.m., a veterans publication released a short article titled, "The Ones Who Stand When You're Gone." Its final line would be quoted thousands of times in the weeks to come. Raymond Kane never needed to speak because 12 others did, without raising their voices once. Back at the store, the manager finally arrived. Pale, silent, his phone had already lit up with the photo twice before he even parked. He walked past the clerks without a word, to the back wall, unlocked the display case, and pulled out the very M1 Garand Kane had asked to see. He carried it to the front, placed it gently beside the photograph. Then he reached for a blank sheet of paper, wrote something in his own hand, slid it into a clear display frame next to the weapon. No speeches, no dramatic gestures. Just one line. "He carried it once. We'll carry the memory now." Outside, someone had left a single white flower by the door. Then a challenge coin, then a folded slip of paper. On it, one word: respect. By nightfall, a small crowd had gathered. No chants, no protests, just quiet. A hush filled with the kind of reverence that headlines can never manufacture. As for Raymond Kane, he didn't respond to the news. Didn't tell, didn't comment, didn't even know about the online storm building behind his silence. He went home the same way he had arrived, unnoticed. But something had shifted, because now when he passed people on the sidewalk, they didn't look through him. They looked twice, because now the town knew. Now they understood who they had told to leave, and who had answered in his place. In the days that followed, change came quietly, not publicly, not dramatically, but deeply. The gun shop, once just another place to buy tactical gear, became something else. It became a space of memory. Veterans began to visit, not with shopping lists, but with stories. Some left patches of their own beside Cain's photo. Others asked in hushed tones, "Is he okay?" No one truly knew. Well, Cain himself hadn't changed. He still rose at dawn, walking his 2-mile route before the sun got too high. Still ordered black coffee, no sugar, from the corner diner. Still sat in the back booth, the one no one ever asked to share. And he never once mentioned the day he was turned away. Never brought up the men who showed up behind him. Not to the waitress, not to the cook, not even to the old Marine who sometimes nodded at him across the room. But people noticed anyway. 1 week later, a local high school hosted a Veterans Day assembly. Cain didn't show up, didn't respond. But the following Monday, the principal received a plain envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter describing a rescue mission from 1970. No name, no signature, just a coordinate and the names of 6 men who came home. The letter was framed and placed in the hallway. No plaque, no announcement. Just there. Only back at the gun shop, the scorched flag patch remained in its case. The owner had it mounted in glass and added a final inscription. For the man we didn't recognize and the brothers who wouldn't let us forget. The story spread quietly through veteran forums, then talk radio, then into places where policy was shaped by memory more than noise. But Cain, he never said a word. And he didn't need to, because the world had finally remembered him. And this time, they didn't look away. No one wrote op-eds about what happened in it that day, because it wasn't a protest. It wasn't a confrontation. It was something rarer. 12 men stood for one of their own without saying a single word, and the message was received. 2 weeks later, the SEALs returned, but not to the gun shop. They came to the diner. They didn't take a table. They didn't make a scene. They simply walked in, one by one, and stood silently at the back booth, where Raymond Cain sat sipping his black coffee alone. He looked up, met their eyes. For a moment, the whole room held its breath. Then the youngest among them, barely old enough to remember the early years of Iraq, not even born when Cain left the service, stepped forward. "Sir," he said, voice steady but soft, "if it's all right, we'd like to sit with you." Cain gave a single nod. They filled the booth around him, shoulder to shoulder. And for the next hour, no one at the diner heard a single word from that table. But everyone remembered the silence because that silence said more than words ever could. Some men don't need rank to command respect. They don't ask for medals. They don't tell their stories. They just do what has to be done, then disappear quietly into the background. Chief Raymond Cain never walked into that shop to prove anything. He didn't go there to be honored, thanked, or remembered. He already knew who he was. What mattered to him wasn't attention. It was this, that his team remembered, that they hadn't forgotten, that when the world got loud and foolish, they showed up, not with outrage, but with presence. That's loyalty. That's brotherhood. That's the code. It doesn't get printed on plaques. It doesn't get screamed into microphones. It gets carried quietly, mission after mission, year after year. Most people would have passed right by the man in the faded SEAL Team 3 cap. But 12 men didn't. And now, neither will we. So I'll ask you now, have you ever met someone like Raymond Cain? Someone who served, who never asked for praise, who never told their story, but changed the lives of others anyway. Write their name in the comments. Tell us how they lived. Say the things they never would, because they deserve to be remembered. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Human Stories. We're here to make sure that men like Cain are never invisible again. Their silence was earned. Now it's our turn to speak for them. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, if you ever see an old man standing quietly in a store, a diner, or a classroom, don't ask him what he's done. Just give him space, because he already has. His team knew it too, that they hadn't forgotten, that when the world got small and quiet, they showed up, not with outrage, but with presence. That's loyalty. That's brotherhood. That's the code that doesn't get printed on plaques or shouted in politics. It gets carried quietly, one mission at a time. Most people wouldn't have noticed the man with the limp and the faded cap at 12. SEALs did, and now so do we. So I'll ask you, have you ever met someone like Chief Beckett? Someone who served, who never asked for praise, who never told their story, but who changed lives. Anyway, write their name in the comments. Tell us how they lived. Say the things they never would because they deserve to be remembered. And if this story touched you, subscribe to the Human Stories. We're here to make sure that men like Beckett are never invisible again. Their silence was earned. Now it's time we speak for them. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, if you ever see an old man standing quietly in a store, a diner, or a classroom, don't ask him what he's done. Just give him space because he's already